In this video, we're going to give you a detailed guide to the two-rail sweep modelling tool and how to control the shapes that you can create with it. We're going to cover all aspects of the two-rail sweep form and the choices that you have under the right mouse click menu while using the function. Let's open a new copy of the software. Let's select the option to open an existing file. And from the project folder for this example, we're going to open our first file, openrailexample.crv3d, and hit open. We can see here a selection of vectors, and we're going to use these to help us to demonstrate the two-rail sweep function. So we can see what's going on in the 2D and the 3D view. Let's click on the icon to tile the windows vertically. And then to find the two-rail sweep icon, we're going to come down to the Modelling tab, and we're going to come up to the first row under Modelling Tools and the second icon, which is two-rail sweep. If we click on that, we'll go into the function itself. To create a two-rail sweep shape, we need a minimum of 3 vectors selected. The first 2 vectors we select are going to represent the rails, and they'll govern the XY position and control the flow of the shape. The third and subsequent vectors we select will be the cross sections, and these will be hung on the rails and swept along in order to generate our component. Let's go ahead and create a quick shape now so we can show you how this works. First we need to select the rails, so I'm going to click on this top vector. I'm going to hold shift down and click on this second vector here, and then we're going to come up and click on the button that says Use Selection under where it says Drive Rails. That'll select those 2 curves that we've chosen, label them, show me the start point with these green nodes, the direction with the arrowheads on it, and the fact that the red one is left and the green one is right. And that's important information when we come to hang the cross section on it, and we'll look at that later. Now, in order to create a shape, I just need to select one more open vector that will act as the cross section that's going to be swept along those rails. So I can come down and I could click on this round shape here, and at this point we could go ahead and hit apply. However, as with any component we create in the software, it's always useful before you go ahead and hit the apply button to check the combine mode, which indicates how it's going to combine with other components we have in the part. So we have add, subtract, merge high and low, and also to give it a name. So I'll just call this sweep, hit apply. We can see the software calculates the shape for us. It shows us it in the 3D view here. So we can see that that round profile has been swept along these vectors. You can see if we look down Z, how the position of those rails is governing the position that the part's been created in the work area of the job. At this point, we could actually go ahead and hit close, and we can see the component we've created has been added to the component tree. Now let's delete that shape we created and look at some more of the options within the form. Let's right mouse click here, we'll come down and choose the option to delete this. As with any component now, we could take this, use the editing tools, move it, rotate it and manipulate it as much as we wanted. It's important to realise it's not connected to the vectors we use to create it. As soon as we've finished within the function, then those two no longer are linked, and we're able to use that as an individual shape without manipulating the vectors as well. This stage I'm going to right mouse click on that shape we've created. I'm going to hit delete, and let's look at some more of the options within the two-rail sweep function. Let's come back up, click on the icon again. Again, I'm going to select the first rail, shift to select the second, click on the Use Selection button. I'm going to come back down and pick my round profile. Again, we'll just give that a name. We'll hit apply, taking the same options that we were using before. And if we look in the 3D view, we can see that currently the software is maintaining the height of the cross section all the way along the shape here. We can see if we look at the end, we've got our rounded cross section, but the height is remaining the same no matter what the width of the shape is in between the rails. The first option that we can check here within the form is the ability to scale that cross section with the width. If we click on this and hit apply, you'll see we'll get a much more organic shape because the software is actually going to vary the height of the object as it sweeps along here and as those rails get wider and thinner, and we can see that by looking at the side now how that undulates based on the distance between the rails as it's being swept along. The next two options that we have in the form, sweep between spans and fill center, we'll look at later in the video. If we come down a little further, we can see the other option we've got here is to scale the shape we're creating. At the moment, we're just letting the software naturally find the size of this based on the width that we've got between the rails and on the size of the cross section that we've got drawn here. If we want, we could check this box and we could override this. You can see the height I currently have typed in there is 0, so it's actually become a flat shape now. But if we enter a value of, say, 0.5, we can see how that's going to scale it so that the highest point in the shape now is at 0.5 inches. We could type in a much bigger value if we wanted. We can hit the space bar to get that to automatically update. Or if I want, I could just uncheck that, and once more the software would go on and just find its own natural height. We also have a couple of other buttons within the form here. If we click on the reset button, what it will do is leave the objects that we've got selected still selected. So you can still see I've got my rails and my cross section selected, but it's reset the 3D shape. So now I could make changes and hit apply again. Or if I actually wanted to get rid of my selection altogether, as well as my shape, I could click on the clear rails button, and you can see now I've only got selected the last thing that I had chosen there as if it was a normal vector selection mode. At this point, with the form still open, we could go ahead and select new rails if we wanted, click on use selection, choose other parameters within here, and go ahead and hit apply in order to create a new version of this component, until we went ahead and closed or clicked on the Start New Component button. So far, all the shapes we've created have had a single cross-section swept along our rails. It's possible for us to assign multiple cross-sections to our two-rail sweep shape. Let's come over and click on the Reset button here, so we'll reset the shape. So I still have my two rails selected here. Now what I'm going to do is select the round vector here, which is going to be my first cross section, and then once I've clicked on that, I'm going to come over to my rails and I'm going to click on the start point of the left hand rail, the red rail. If I click on that, it's going to add that cross section to the start. It's also going to add a copy of that cross section to the end, and we can see that indicated by this red node here, and that's showing me which side of this cross section. So on the left hand side here, the red is going to be hung on the top rail because it's showing me the red node there. Now if I wanted to add a different cross section at the end here, so at the moment if we hit apply, that's still going to sweep the same shape we had before, the round cross section all the way along the shape. But if I want to change the one at the end, I can select a different cross section from the 2D view, a different open vector, and I can just come up and click on the position here so that we get that check mark there. Now we can see that that's changed color, and it's showing me this yellow node on the cross section, indicating that that position of this cross section is where that's going to be hung on the shape there. Now in order to recalculate the shape, I can hit apply, and we can see that the shape's now going to go from a round cross section at one end to this triangular cross section at the other, and it's just going to sweep between those along the shape. And if we want, we can add multiple cross sections into the middle of the shape as well. So I could come over here and we could click this shape here, this open vector, and I could click here and just add in a new cross section, and we can see that shown with a green node there across. So again, it's showing me the position of this end of my cross section and where it's going to be hung, and I've now got a red, a yellow and a green. So we have the red, yellow and green, and the order is just purely going to be determined by how the software finds them as it sweeps along the shapes. If we go ahead and hit apply now, we can see it's going to go from the round cross section to our ridged cross section around this position here, and then that's going to transition out to the triangle at the end. As well as the options we have in the two-rail sweep form, there's also a number of things I can do to control the shape by clicking on the right hand mouse button. If we come over different areas, we're going to get different buttons. If I hover the mouse over a rail, then you can see I have various options that we're going to look at in a moment. Also, if I hover over the node of a cross section here, you can see I get a slightly different set, including the ability to delete a cross section. So any that I didn't want, I could right mouse click on and choose the option to delete cross section. They'll delete that, and now when we hit apply, they'll no longer be part of the shape we're calculating. And as I mentioned before, we can always pick any other cross-section and replace one that's already there without having to delete it. Here we can see at the moment we have the round going to the triangle at the end. If I want, I can make sure this vector is selected here, and then I can come up and click on the end here, and that will change, and you can see it's now gone from the round to this one, and if we hit apply, we can see the result of that shape being calculated. Now there's something else we can do while we're still in the two-rail sweep mode. It's normally best to hit the reset button when you do this. So if I come over and click on reset, you can see that that's retained my selection of my rails and my cross sections. But now if I click in the 2D view and I hit N on the keyboard, I can go into what we call node editing mode. This allows me to actually change the data that I've got in here, so I can edit the shapes that we're working with. And you need to learn the different shortcut keys are available here, or use the right mouse click menu. You can see I can right mouse click, say I want to insert a point there, so I'm able to make edits to this. I can change the vectors. I can even come down and click on the points and change the cross sections as well. So you can see we've got quite a different selection of shapes here at the moment. Now if I come back up and click where it says reselect rails, what the software is going to do is remember which vectors it had selected before in terms of the rails and in terms of the cross sections, and I can actually now hit apply and use my edited shapes in order to create a new component. Now if I select the triangle again and click on the left hand rail to insert that as a cross section, something else we can do with the cross sections is move their endpoints around once we've been inserted them. So here you can see that's been put in a position across the part there, but I can actually move the positions of this around, and I can even move the ones on the end as well. And now if we were to take this and hit apply, we can see the software is going to use that information, and it's still going to sweep between these. These lines give you a good idea as to the flow of the shape, and at the end here, even though we're not going all the way to the end of our vector, the shape we're creating is still stopping between the last 2 points that I've got that define the position of that cross section. So you've really got a lot of control over the shape you're creating when using this function by creating the different vectors and having this ability to insert and reposition the cross sections along the rails. Once we're happy with the shape we're creating, we can just hit close, and that will be added to the component tree as you've seen. Or if we have multiple sets of two-rail sweep shapes we want to make, we can click on the Start New Component button. That will create the shape we were working on as a component, and then we can go ahead and select a different set of rails, click on the Use Selection button, and then click a different cross section, give this a name and hit apply, and also create a shape there as well. Let me go ahead and hit close. We can see both of those in the component tree here. Once more, I'm just going to select both of those, right mouse click and delete them, and we'll look at some of the other options we've got now using this more simple set of rails at the bottom of our 2D view. Let's go back into the two-rail sweep function. I'm going to select this straight line here, shift and select this straight line, click on the Use Selection button. I'm going to switch off the scale cross section with width, and I'm going to select the triangle we've got here as our cross section, and we'll just call this sweep and hit apply. So we can see the shape has gone along there. We may even actually want to click on here in order so that we can see which end of this shape is being hung on our rails. If we hit apply, you can see that'll be the same shape. But what this is showing me is the red node here corresponds to the red node on this rail. So I know as we look along the end of the shape here, we can see that triangle being swept along where this end here is being hung on this side of the shape. Now it may be that we'd like to reverse that. We could either do it by changing the selection order by selecting the bottom rail first and the top rail second before we click on the button, or we can right mouse click over one of the rails and choose the swap rail order option from the drop down list here. So if I click on swap rail order and hit apply, you can see that the shape will change there, and you can also see now that the red node on our cross section is being hung on this bottom rail here. Again, if we right mouse click, swap rail order, hit apply, that'll go back to the other side, and again you can see the red node on this rail now. Something else we can do under the right click menu, if we go over the rail and right mouse click here, is reverse the rail. If I click on that, you can see that what happens are the arrows are now going in the other direction. If we hit apply, what we're actually going to see is our shape is basically going to be twisted up. And that's because at the moment this rail at the bottom is going left to right, but now our top rail is going right to left. Now typically what you'd see when you select your rails and hit use selection is those arrows going in opposite directions, and at that point you'd be able to right mouse click on and choose the option to reverse rail before you actually calculate your shape to make sure it's not twisted up. Now let's take a look at this option here to sweep between spans. What this does is if each of our cross sections has the same number of vector spans in it, or the same number of nodes, to think of it in a different way, then it'll actually sweep between each of those spans in order to control the shape. We can demonstrate this here by clicking on this round profile here, then clicking roughly in the middle of our shape to add that as a cross section and hitting apply. What the software's doing now is sweeping between spans. You can see that's checked there, and this round profile here has two spans, one that goes from the end to the middle and then from the middle to the other end, whereas our triangle has two spans that go from here to the right hand side down to the end. So the triangle is sweeping between this span here and the left hand side of our round shape, and then that's sweeping back out to the triangle here. This will only work if each of our cross sections has the same number of spans. If I just click into the 2D view for a second here and go into node editing, I can select these just to demonstrate what I mean by the spans. If we zoom in there, we can see a span from node to node and node to node. Let's just zoom out and click on this one, and there's a span from node to node and node to node, and that is what we're sweeping along here from the spans of the triangle to the two half spans of our round shape in the middle here. Let's just click on the reselect rails button there. Now if we uncheck the option and hit apply, you'll see the shape will change, and all that the software is doing now is just linear transition between the cross sections without worrying about the spans in there. So you can see it's just blending from the triangle straight down towards the round shape in the middle and then back out to the triangle at the other end. If we check sweep between spans back on and hit apply, then it'll go back to sweeping between the individual spans within each of the shapes. Now that option will only work if each of the cross sections has the same number of spans. If I click on this one here and click to add it, you can see that straight away these red numbers appear. And what they're doing is indicating how many spans each cross section has. If these don't match, what that's telling me is it doesn't matter whether this is checked or not, because when I hit apply, it's just going to do the linear transition between them, because it doesn't have the ability to go between different numbers of spans as it goes down the cross sections. So if you see these numbers, it's going to ignore the option to sweep between spans. If the numbers don't appear and you have this checked, then it is going to use that option. The last thing I want to show you with this example file is how the software controls how the shape flows through each of the cross sections. Let's go ahead and click on the button to clear rails here. I'm going to select the straight line, shift and select the other straight line, click on the use selection button. I'm going to click on my round profile and click on the end point there in order to add that to each end as a cross section, and then I'm going to click on the triangle, and again I'm going to click roughly in the middle with this. Now if we go ahead and hit apply, we can see the shape that we're creating there. Again, I've got the sweep between spans option on. Now if we look down the y-axis here and I zoom in, you can see that the shape is kind of going in a wave, almost a bell curve, so it's flowing smoothly out of here, smoothly up and through the middle, and then smoothly back down here. We can control that by right mouse clicking on each of our cross sections in the 2D view and either checking or unchecking the smooth option here. If I uncheck this for my 3 cross sections, so I'm right mouse clicking on each and unchecking the smooth, and we hit apply again, you can see the shape very subtly changed there, so that now I've got a straight transition between each of these. So we're going to transition straight up and straight down again if we're looking from the side there. So that's now straight line, and a straight line down and no longer a bell curve through there. Again, if we wanted to, I could right mouse click, choose the smooth option, hit apply. Now it'll smoothly flow through the middle, but it's not trying to smoothly flow through the end. So that's just going straight up from there, then smoothly through the middle and straight down to there. If I right mouse click and choose smooth and apply, now again we can see subtly this goes straight up and then smoothly through there, then down and smoothly through there as well. So at this point it's effectively going through that in a horizontal direction. Right mouse click here and switch on the smooth again there and get back to the original state it's in. It's quite subtle, but again just showing you another way that we have to control the shape when we're creating a two-rail sweep. So at this point we've finished with this example, but what I'd like to do now is close this, go to File and Close. I'm not going to save this, and then I'm going to open the other file from the project folder here called Closed Rail Example, and we'll show you a few of the other features that you can use within the tool. Let's click on Open. The examples we were looking at in the previous file both use sets of rails that were open vectors. Now we're going to show you an example that uses closed vectors for the rails. At the moment you can see I have a few entities drawn in the 2D view. First thing I want to do is to take this vector, we're going to offset it outwards to create our other rail for the shape that we're going to model. So select the vector, click on the offset selected vectors icon. In here we're going to choose outwards, type in a distance of 1 and click on the option to create sharp offset corners. You can leave the other two options unchecked and we can hit offset and close. To make it easier to see what we're creating when we're building our shapes, let's click on the icon here to tile the windows vertically. Now I'm going to come down to the modeling tab and I'm going to go back into the two-rail sweep function. Let's click on the icon here again. Once more I'm going to select my vectors, so I'm going to select this one, hold shift down and select this one, so I'm selecting the outer rail, then the inner rail and click on the use selection button. Now I'm going to select the vector for my cross section and click in order to add that to my rails. Now straight away I'm getting a lot of visual clues to problems that I'm going to have with this shape if I was to go ahead and hit apply now. We can see that my cross section is being stretched between the start point of each of those vectors. It's especially important when we're using closed vectors like this for our rails that the start points are in coincident positions, at least relative to each other on the two rails. Now I could go out and adjust that on the vector itself, or we also have the option in here. If I come over this point, you'll see I get a little crosshair shown to me on the cursor with a little check mark, and I could right mouse click there and then choose the option to make start point. So if I click on that, we can see that's moved my start point to the adjacent corner there. Now something else we'll notice here, if we click this back into position, is that the lines are all over the place still. And that's because if we look carefully, we can see the arrows for the red rail are going around counterclockwise, and the arrow for the green rail are going clockwise. Again, these need to go in the same direction, so I'm going to come onto the inner rail, right mouse click and choose the option to reverse rail. Now we can see we've got everything flowing round in the right direction. What I'm going to do now is just give this a name, so we'll call it frame, and I'm going to hit apply. Now we're going to see that we've still got a problem with the shape we're creating here. You can see how twisted it's getting in the corners. And the reason for that is, as it sweeps the cross section around these shapes, it's like two racing cars that are racing around a track that have to start and finish at exactly the same time. In order to do that, the outside one needs to effectively go faster to get back to the same point here because the rail it's going round is longer. And that's what's happening here, is effectively our shapes are getting out of sync as they're being swept around. We can help that though by positioning more copies of this cross section across each of the corners of our shape. Now in this case we are lucky because we've deliberately designed this so that both the inside and the outside rail have the same number of nodes on them, or the same number of spans if you want to think of it in a different way. And because of that, we can right mouse click over this first cross section here, and we have the option to add to all rail nodes. So if I click on that, the software will find each pair of nodes, it will put a cross section in across those, and now I can hit apply, and we can see that that's just going to help control that shape so that we get the effect of nice mitered corners as that's being swept around. Now, unless you've designed your rails so that they have the same number of nodes, there's a reasonable chance that you would not be able to use that add to all rail nodes option. Let's give you an example of how you could still put in these nice corners just a little more manually if we didn't have that same number of nodes on each rail. Let's go ahead and close this here. I'm just going to right mouse click and delete that, and I'm going to select my inner rail here, hit N on the keyboard and just hit I in order to pop in a couple of extra nodes there. So now we don't have the same number of nodes on each vector that we had before. Now I can come back into the 2-rail sweep. I'm going to select my outer rail, shift and select this one. I'm going to click on the Use Selection button. We can click to grab our cross section, then click here. Now if I right mouse click over here, you can see the Add to Rail Nodes option is greyed out, and that's because they don't have the same number of nodes. In order to add the cross sections manually though, I can still make sure it's selected, and then I can just come around the outside rail here, and you'll see if I go over the corner there, I get the little crosshair icon showing me that I'm snapping to this corner point, and I can just put in a cross section at each corner point here. Now you'll notice that these don't necessarily correspond to the points on the inside, and that is because the software doesn't know that there's necessarily a pair to the point that you're putting it at there. So what you do need to do is zoom in on these and manually click and drag to make sure that they're snapped onto the opposite nodes. I can hit F on the keyboard to fit that back into the window. I can zoom in here, click and drag that, and it'll snap, and I'll get the crosshairs showing that it's snapping. And so I can manually add these across these nodes, even though we don't have the same number between the two rails. Click and drag, you can see that snap there, I get the crosshair. Once I've got those all in position, we can still come in and hit apply, and we can get the shape that we wanted to create before, once more with these nice mitered corners. Now if we close this, there's actually another problem with this shape still at the moment. It doesn't look too bad in the 3D view, but if I look at it from the side, I can see it's very flat. I was expecting to have a frame with a deep vertical edge on the outside of the part. The reason I don't is because the cross section I've drawn here is lacking part of the geometry. What I actually wanted is to have a line that comes down the back edge here to define my vertical edge. If I select this and look at the bottom of the screen, we can see that the width and the height of that vector is 1 inch wide and 1/2 inch high. But if we look at the component we've created and click on that and go to set height, that's only just under 1/8 of an inch high. And that's because what the software has done is it's automatically just put the end of the cross section on one rail, the other end on the other. So what it's actually laid flat onto my modeling plane is something like the line that I've just sketched in there. So the key lesson from this is what we actually want is what we often refer to as a leg running down the side here in order to give it its proper vertical depth. When you draw a cross section, it's effectively got to be like you've done a cutaway through the part that you want to sweep around the shape. So this line that I've just drawn in there, this vector line I've just drawn, we can actually use in order to help us construct this leg here. If I select that and hit on N to go into node editing, I can drag a box to select this node. I can hold Shift and drag a box to select this node. And then on the keyboard, if I hit X, what it's going to do is line up the X value of this node with the value of the first node that I selected. So it's just dragged that across there horizontally so that now they're both in the same X position. Now there's still two separate vectors, so if we go back to selection mode, I can select this, shift and select this, click on the icon here to join vectors, and now we have a single vector that represents our cross-section. Cross-section has to be an open shape like this, but wherever the two ends are, that is the line that's going to be placed along the modeling plane when we sweep this around. Let's go ahead and click back on the modeling tab. I'm going to right mouse click to delete that shape we've got there. And now if we come up and click on the icon to zoom to fit my 2D view. Now what we want to do is do the same operation. This time though, before we go in here to speed things up, I'm going to go back into node editing, and I'm going to hit N on the keyboard, and I'm going to hit D over these two nodes to delete them again. So we're now back to having the same number of nodes on the outer profile and the inner profile. What that will do is allow us to click to come into the two-rail sweep. I can click to select my outer one, shift and click to select the inner one, click on the Use Selection button. I can click my cross-section, my new edited cross-section, click on the first point here on my rail, right mouse click, choose the Add to All Rail Nodes option because we have the same number of nodes on each one. And now let's give that a name and hit Apply. And now you can see the difference that adding that vertical edge on the back side has made to our frame. We've actually now got the proper cross-section we wanted being swept around the shape in order to produce this frame shape component. Now at the moment we're creating the frame where the vertical edge on the left hand side here is being hung on the outer rail. Now we showed that by the red node here, the red node here, showing me where that side's being hung. If I was to right mouse click on these and say we want to swap rail order, then we can see that now that vertical edge is going to be hung on the inside, and if I hit Apply, we can see that recalculate in the 3D view there, and we can see the effect that would have on the shape we're creating here. Now there's one more option we haven't yet looked at for the two-rail sweep, and that's on the form here, this checkbox that says Fill Center of Inner Closed Vector Rails. If I've got two closed vectors for my rails, what I can do is check that, and now when we hit Apply, what the software will do is take whatever the height is of my cross section on the inner edge, and it will just fill that shape with a flat plane at the same height and make that part of my two-rail sweep component. So you can see with the same set of vectors here, we were able to create two different types of frames, and also by checking this option here, now we've actually created a plaque that we could go ahead and add components to, or we could engrave text into. If we're happy with that, we could hit close, we could see our component added to the component tree, and again we've got the same ability to use the editing tools in order to manipulate that now once we've created the shape. So that almost concludes this guide to the options in the two-rail sweep tool. You've seen what a powerful tool this is and how you can get great control over the component shape you're modeling by using the options within the form, and also using the options that you have under the right mouse click menu. You can see examples of the two-rail sweep used throughout the tutorials to model lots of different types of shapes, and in conjunction with the other modeling tools within the software. And that concludes this video.